We're going to talk about power not from the point of view of being victimized by it, but by developing it and using it against our enemies. That we as African people must study the rules of organization. We must study the means of relating one to each other in such a way that we multiply our power. And we must study our enemy's organization such that we can probe that organization and destroy the power of the enemy. And we can do it.
What's up YouTube family? Welcome back to my space. This is Evans Raiola. Guys, thank you so much for tuning to watch today's video. Guys, for the longest time I've been doing videos on white oppression, on what black people have been going through in America and all over the world. And on today's video we want to talk about black power. We all know that for us to come outside of the white supremacist oppression, we must have the power. You know, what we are going through right now is just because we do not have the power. How do we get this power? To speak to us today is Dr. Amos Wilson, who is a black psychologist, a scholar, and an activist known for his deep analysis of black power, white oppression, and the psychological impact of racism. His work primarily focused on how systemic oppression affects black consciousness and what must be done to empower black communities. His book, Blueprint for Black Power, lays out a comprehensive plan for economic, political, and psychological empowerment. Wilson argued that black people must build institutions, controlled resources, and develop a collective consciousness to counter-react white supremacy. He believed that merely protesting against oppression was sufficient. Real power comes from ownership and control over economic and political structures. Family, I want you to watch this video of Dr. Amos Wilson. Once the video is done, we will get back and do a critical analysis about the same. Let's watch this together, fam.
We're going to talk about power not from the point of view of being victimized by it, but by developing it and using it against our enemies. At the last lecture I gave at the Slave Theater, where we were talking about global white supremacy, I initiated this theme on power by saying that we can explain the reasons Europeans victimize us in as many ways as we would like. We could talk about them as being ice people as against the sun people, and that explanation is valid. I have no problems with it. We can talk about them in terms of their protecting their more recessive genes against our more dominant genes. We can even get into a little psychoanalysis and deal with the myth of length of penises and penis envy and all the other things, and black balls and white balls and brown balls and black holes and white balls rolling into black holes and things of this nature. And all that's fine. That's a lot of fun. But no matter how you explain why or how the European got to the point of victimizing us, I think the essential issue is that the European victimizes us because he can, because he has the power to do so. And we are victimized because we haven't developed the power to prevent his doing so. So in a sense, no matter how we explain why he does what he does, at the end point, he does what he does because he can. And consequently then, I infer from this that we can end his victimization of us when we end his power to do so. And consequently, I want to bring into the domain of discussion in this community the subject matter of power. I want us, in addition to studying black history and culture, to study power, its accumulation, its use, and application. We should talk about it every day and everywhere. And we should read about it, and we should develop the means of using it. We should come to understand the nature of how white power is organized. In the end, power does not flow from the genes of white folk. Does that not flow from their ice age? It flows from the nature of their organization and the way they have chosen to relate one to the others. And it flows from their intentionality as a people and their appropriate organization of themselves to realize their intentionality, one of which is, of course, the domination of African people. And that means then that we as African people must study the rules of organization. We must study the means of relating one to each other in such a way that we multiply our power. And we must study our enemy's organization such that we can probe that organization and destroy the power of the enemy. And we can do it. We have a tremendous amount of power in our hands. Right here in America, we are not a weak people by any stretch of the imagination. The only weakness is in our minds and in our imaginations. That's the only place. We are not a dependent people in the material sense, only in the psychological sense. The only thing, ladies and gentlemen, we must get over is our cowardice. That's the only thing. That's the only thing. We can change this. I will speak briefly then to the issue this evening relating to the message that Dr. Bregan brought you last week around this conference titled Genetic Factors in Crime, Findings, Uses, and Implications, which was to occur at the University of Maryland. I've warned you many times, and I've told you many times, I don't know whether it gets through to you or not, that we as black people must get over this thing of looking at schools and universities as advanced vocational training institutions. How many people recall that I've repeated this time and time again? That the function of education is not jobs. That is not the primary function. Children and people are educated. The primary function for education is to advance the interests of a people and to protect their interests, to secure their survival. That the educational structures and institutions of this country are as much a part of its defense, of its armed forces, as are its soldiers. The bombs, the weaponry that this nation uses against other nations and intimidates other nations with, develop out of the universities. The germ warfare, the chemical warfare, political, because some great professor is the head of this particular department, or they have illustrious names in the department, chances are you will never see them teach you in a class. The graduate students on some kind of assistantship will more likely be your teacher. Where are the brains and where are the professors? They're doing research. And often they're doing research on government grants for the government, for the corporations, for the other institutions in the society, and they are part of then the total system of domination of this country. Afrocentric education above all, and even beyond the teaching of African history and African culture, is preparing our children to defend the very lives of African people, is a military preparation and a preparation for war. It is the means by which we will maintain our biological survival as a people. For if you do not survive, what does it matter if you teach reading to 100% of our children, or they learn math well, or they learn computer science, or all the other things you think are important, when your very lives are in the balance, and it is very likely that they will be snuffed out in the next 10 to 20 years. And yet we still continue to look at schools and colleges and universities as vocational institutions. And here we have then at the University of Maryland, long connected with the U.S. Army, by the way, hosting a conference on so-called genetic factors in crime. Reagan charged that this meeting, which was canceled, was part of a broader program, a violence initiative, a federal government research agenda, so that this program was only a part of a larger agenda. And it was designed to move toward finding a genetic marker that would supposedly identify children at high risk of becoming criminals, and to develop plans to deter them through medication. And this is interesting due to the fact that there's little or no real information that links directly in any kind of strong way or even in a mild way a relationship between genes and criminality. There's been no DNA segment that has been discovered that codes for crime. When you think about it, the idea is ludicrous anyway. What is crime? What is violence? What is violence? In other words, I'm asking this question because you have to do a linguistic analysis. They are all forms of what? Violence. There are many different types of what? Crime. Different types of aggression. Not all violence is necessarily bad. There is what we in psychology may call hostile aggression. But there is aggression or violence that may be used in terms of what? Self-defense. Violence may be used to protect your children from attack. Violence may be used to protect the lives of other people. So now if we're going to get a gene for violence, for a type of violence, or in removing the gene for violence, if we were to find it, which is an unlikely situation, are we also removing a people's capacity to defend themselves and to use violence in their own interest? What I'm saying is then, be very careful when people use words like violence, aggression, crime, and so forth, and ask yourself, what kind of crime? You know, do we have a gene for every type of crime you can name, so that even when we change definitions of crime, a new gene comes into being that we're going to find related to that particular crime? And when we decide that certain other behavior is no longer a crime, will the gene which was coded for that crime disappear? Ludicrous. Ludicrous. I talk in Black on Black Violence about the structuration of crime. That crime follows, the type of violence that we talk about, or crime, even its nature, follows the class structure and follows the skills levels of criminals. You see? Why is there so much so-called violent crime in certain segments of the society? Because when you look at the skills levels of the people committing them, if they were to commit a crime, that's about the only crime they could commit. If they were accountants, they would commit the crime of embezzlement and steal hundreds of thousands or millions because they have a particular ability or skill. And you'd be a fool if you were an accountant or in an S&L where you could steal millions of dollars and then make the public pay billions back and then hang out on the street and knock somebody out in the head. So here we have this crimogenic society that robs our people of skills and other means, so that if they decide to participate in a crime, then the probability is that it will be violent by the very nature of the way the society has set them up in the beginning. In other words, the society even determines the type of crime you are most likely to commit itself. Okay? And then it tells you, you're violent. Teach me to be an accountant. I won't hit any more people in the head. I'll just rob them by books. Okay? And then they want to talk about white-collar crime and, and the other kind of collar crime. Come on. Wake up. This has nothing to do with genes. It has to do with the nature. I've also told you about reversal, right? I mentioned the fact that in order for us as a people to be in the situation that we're in, we literally have to be turned backwards. We have to think backwards, behave backwardly, deal with the world backwardly. It's necessary. That's the only way the system can maintain itself. Sometimes I say the best way to win an argument is to concede to your opponent. Okay, there is a genetic marker for crime. Let's now look at the criminal record of African peoples and European peoples. The record is clear. If there is a genetic marker for crime, when we look at the fact that the European has committed a crime against every people on every continent, destroyed millions of people, then that argues for his genetic criminality. And that argues then for us to medicate him and control him. The other thing I'm surprised at is we keep being surprised. And we keep thinking that this is some new initiative. I mean, the violence initiative began with our enslavement and continues today. We already have bought the violence initiative, ladies and gentlemen. It is already operating. We bought it when we bought learning disabilities, when we bought the concept of hyperactivity, when we bought the concept of impulsivity, when we bought the concept of special education. You're already in it. Connected to these so-called symptoms of learning disability are the very same symptoms they're going to try to connect to the so-called genetic markers. And our children are already being drugged. The violence initiative has already occurred because our youth are already going to jail in record numbers. So why are we talking about these people are initiating something to bring and put our youth in jail? They're already in jail. Those that are not already in jail are in juvenile detention, are under the aegis of the BCWs. You heard it tonight. In the special education program, already being drugged, already being therapized, already having their minds distorted in various ways. And the worst violence initiative program is the public educational system itself. So this so-called initiative that you're talking about tonight is a mopping up operation. That's all it is. If you're telling me in Washington, D.C. and other places, black youth and black people, 75% are in some form of contact with the criminal justice system already, Some 60% in any given day in Baltimore and other areas are already in contact with the criminal justice system. Well, then what will this new initiative do? Just make it what? 100%. We should have already been what? Upset. Why are we kicking and screaming now? We should have been screaming already. This initiative is an old trick in psychiatry and psychology. It's a trick that we call the medicalization of social problems. That is to define a social and political problem as a medical problem, and to put psychiatrists who are doctors, physicians with MDs in control of the definition of these problems, even though they are an arm of the state, as are social workers, as are psychologists, as are all of the other helping professionals, but members of the state and arms of the state. But we are so willing to submit to their authority, such that when they define social and political behavior and behavior which has social and political causes in medical terms, even the oppressed and the victimized consent to their mistreatment. Louis Sullivan is a part of this, but in a sense we are all a part of it, because we buy the medicalization of issues. And they know, since we are willing to do anything the doctor tells us to do, why are you taking that poison? The doctor said take it every 2 hours. The doctor says. So now if the doctor says that your children have a marker, a genetic marker, then let's go with it. And we don't have time this evening, one of these days we'll talk about psychiatric power and the role of psychiatrists in the system. Oh, the history of psychiatrists is horrendous. You won't believe it. You won't believe the tortures that have been created in the name of psychiatry, that are even being perpetrated today. You won't believe the robbing of civil liberties, the robbing of freedom, and all other kinds of things, the complete destruction and taking away of people's constitutional rights in the name of psychiatry. When you medicalize a problem and define it in medical terms, the patient loses all rights. And therefore you can resolve a lot of issues that, if they were defined politically or socially, would then become constitutional and legal issues. But as soon as they are put under the aegis of medicine, then you reduce to a very great extent the legal and constitutional implications. So what we have going here then is an attempt to move social and political problems into the area of psychiatry, so that we, even as African people, can consent to social control and the killing of our people. One quick thing, and I know we're short here. Don't get caught up in this brain and biological basis of behavior. Okay? Don't be deceived because someone can say that they have found a biological correlate with behavior. That means it is genetic in nature, or that means it's congenital, or that means that the society has no responsibility for the behavior that the person is committing. Don't buy that baloney. People run that a lot. You know, as soon as we can locate some kind of brain deficiency and correlate it, then we're ready to say, oh, society is not responsible for it. Are you kidding? Learning and experience physically transforms the brain. Traumatic experiences and even positive experiences changes the biochemical nature of the brain, as well as the neuronal functional organization of the brain, and influences the number of dendrites and synapses and other things that cells use to communicate one with the other. Now, you must understand here then, and I could talk a great deal here about the experiments here that have shown very clearly that if you put certain animals through certain experiences, their brains actually can increase in weight. Let me give you a quick run of things that happens when some rats were placed in various environments. One group was placed in a so-called enriched environment. These rats being selected from the same genetic background, having the same genetic background and the same genetic inheritance. But they were put in under different environments. After they lived in these environments for a while, they were sacrificed and their brains looked at, weighed, measured, and analyzed. Now, those rats that were put in an enriched environment, let's look at some of the things that were found. They had an increased thickness of the cerebral cortex, or the gray matter. In other words, the thinking matter of their brain increased in thickness and weight. A 15% increase in the actual size of the neurons in the cortex. Increases in protein in the brain paralleling the increases in cortical weight, indicating that the growth effect was on tissue and not just on the fluid content of the brain. An increase in the amount of dendritic branching. Dendrites are the hairy branching fibers which project in large numbers from the body of each neuron and which receive input from other neurons and conduct them to the cell bodies of other neurons. There was an increase in the branching of these neurons, and a greater amount of potential information was available to each neuron. An increased number of dendritic spikes per unit length of dendrite.
Family, that was a very, very insightful, speech by Dr. Amos Wilson. For the longest time, we've been crying of white oppression, and he says the only way we can get outside of that is by ensuring that we gain black power. He says the first step is for us to ensure that we actually extensively analyze white oppression, particularly how it operates through media, education, economics, to maintain control over black people. He argued that white supremacy is not just about individual racism, but a deeply embedded system that sustains itself through psychological conditioning and institutional power. So in essence, Wilson's work was about both. He exposed white oppression as a system designed to dominate and disempower black people. He advocated for black power as the only effective response through self-determination, institution building, and economic self-sufficiency. And guys, you get to learn from this. For how long will we be crying as a people? For how long will we be complaining of white oppression time and again? The best way is for us to come up with ways that we can actually empower ourselves and ensure that we will get out of white oppression, by force. Because now once we are empowered people, once we have the power, there is no way the white supremacists will come and try and be discriminative against us. The white supremacists would come and say that there'll be no opportunities for black folks. That would be impossible, because if we're empowered, if you have the power as the black folk, we'll ensure that we create opportunities amongst ourselves that will be fully self-sufficient. And that is one of the goals that black folks should have all over the world. Fully sufficiency. We should be fully sufficient for us to ensure that we are economically upright, for us to ensure that we can be able to depend on ourselves. We are fully sufficient. I went further to do more research on the teachings of Dr. Amos Wilson, specifically on black power, and here is what I came to notice. That Dr. Wilson's concept of black power was deeply rooted in the idea that true liberation for black people requires economic, political, and psychological self-sufficiency, just like I've mentioned. He believed that black communities needed to control their institutions, resources, and economic systems, rather than merely seeking integration or equality within the white-dominated systems. Family, number one, we must fully depend on ourselves as a people. For us to win For us to stop this oppression, we must fully be dependent on ourselves. Here are some of the key aspects of Dr. Amos Wilson's about the Black Power philosophy. And if I start with number one, we'll talk about the economic power. Economic power is the foundation, of Black Power. We must have a lot of power economically. Wilson argued that economic control is the key to real power. He criticized black communities for spending billions of dollars in white-owned businesses while failing to invest in their own. Let us invest in our own businesses, guys. Let us invest in black communities. That way we can be able to have the control economically. The real power comes with having control of the economics. He emphasized the need for black-owned businesses, banks, and industries to prevent economic exploitation and ensure self-reliance. He believed that without economic power, black political and social movements would remain weak and ineffective. Then number two, we have the political power must be rooted in economic strength. He noted that black political leaders often lack real power because they are financially dependent on white-controlled institutions. He encouraged the development of an independent black economic base that could fund political candidates and policies that truly serve black interests. He argued that politics without economic backing is merely symbolic and does not lead to actual control over resources. Then number three, we have psychological liberation is key. Wilson heavily focused on psychological conditioning, stating that white supremacy works not just through oppression, but through the way black people perceive themselves. He analyzed how media, education, and history distort black identity, keeping people mentally enslaved. He also emphasized self-knowledge and mental reprogramming as a critical step towards black empowerment. The number four is the need for institution building. Instead of relying on existing white-controlled institutions, Wilson stressed the importance of creating black institutions in education, finance, media, and technology. He saw education as a tool for empowerment, but only if it was designed to serve the needs of black children and communities. Number five is Black Power is a global movement. He believed that black power was not just about African Americans, but also about global black unity. He encouraged economic and political alliances with Africa and the broader African diaspora to strengthen black influence worldwide. Wilson's criticism of traditional civil rights approaches. He says he was critical on integral strategies that sought acceptance in white institutions rather than building independent black structures. In conclusion, the blueprint, for Black Power says that Wilson laid out a detailed plan for how black people could achieve true independence. He believed that empowerment requires discipline, organization, and a long-term vision rather than reactionary responses to racism. His works remain influential today in discussions about economic self-determination, Pan-Africanism, and black sovereignty. Family, it's time that we just stop crying around, talking around how we are being oppressed without having a proper solution. From today moving forward, I want to challenge black folks. Anytime we are complaining about any issues of white oppression, we should in fact ensure that we are a step closer to solving this issue. How can we solve this issue then? Through black power. How do we get the power? Number one is by ensuring that we are self-sufficient, by ensuring that economically we have a say, that we can speak in front of other leaders and talk about how economical we are as a people, how we can actually promote our own businesses. That way we can be able to grow as a people, man. Let us support black businesses. Let us invest in black businesses. Let us create opportunities in black communities. That way we can be able to get the power. Guys, let us be fully sufficient amongst ourselves. Guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Kindly do consider subscribing to this channel for amazing works in regards to black history and black empowerment. Currently we are on the road to 50,000 subscribers, guys, and we cannot do it without your support. Kindly comment in the video down below. Let us know what you think about black power. Is it doable according to you? Do you think the black communities all over the world can be able to integrate and ensure that we actually gain the black power that we fully deserve? Like this video so that it can be recommended to other YouTube users, and I'll be so grateful. See you all in my next episode. Goodbye.